This is Deacon Toder, who participated in the Vietnam War. Do you have any specifics?
Yeah, I can give you just a quick background. I was in the United States Naval Construction Battalions, known as the Seabees. And if you ever wanted to find more about the Seabees, there's a movie starring John Wayne called The Fighting Seabees. Basically, watch that movie and see what the Seabees do. Basically, what we're trained to do is to work hand in hand with the United States Marine Corps. And when the Marines go in, we go in with the Marine Corps, and they go in and they do the fighting, and we do the building. We're in charge of putting in latrines, and we put in refrigeration. We put in, and that's for blood stuff, and we put in cooking things, and just build. Sometimes, if in fact it's going to be a long term, we go in and we put in airfields, things like that.
So you built bases for them.
We built bases. We also build temporary bases where they'll come into an area like in Vietnam where they had to, before they were able to take over Da Nang, they had to go in and they had to build an outpost outside Da Nang, and then they would work from there. So we put in like a little major city for 2 or 3 Marine battalions, and then they would occupy that, and then we'd move on to do something else. Sometimes in Vietnam, there would be an invasion by the North Vietnamese or Viet Cong, and a lot of times everybody would have to drop their picks and shovels and whatever and pick up their guns and fight back with the Marine Corps. I never had any of that experience, but that's just what happens, and if you see that movie, you'll see. But at any rate, I was in from 1966 through almost the end of 1969, almost 4 full years. And I went in as an E1 and then came out as an E5. And these are just a couple quick photos. This is a photo of me in my office in Puerto Rico. We were building what we called a 48-hour alert base down there, where a lot of times hurricanes would come in and devastate parts of the island, or sometimes a whole entire CB battalion would be decimated over in Vietnam. So it was our job to build a 48-hour alert base to either serve whatever damage was done during a hurricane in the islands, or if there was a terrible situation in Vietnam, be ready to deploy within 2 days to get over there and take the places for that. So that's basically the quick overview. This picture here is a picture of me getting my E5 pin, which is what they call a second-class petty officer. So I was not an officer; I was an enlisted man, but my rank, as high as I could go within 4 years, was an E5, which is a second-class petty officer, and that's me getting my little insignia showing that I made it. I was in Puerto Rico at that time, so that was that. So
What could you do at that rank?
You served as a leader in construction, and for me, I was in charge of the entire base. So all the boilers, all the refrigeration units, all the laundry facilities, all that, I had to put in and maintain, and all the water systems. We had an alert base right on the edge of the water of the Caribbean Sea, and there was no utilities coming into it. So one of the things I was in charge of is running a 4-inch water line from the water plant on one side of the island all the way over the mountains and down into the plant. And so that's what I did. So I really didn't have any opportunity to any combat or anything like that. I was always safe from that. However, I was trained by the Marine Corps on 3 different occasions to, in case we were deployed to Vietnam for whatever reason, we knew what we had to do. And down in Camp Lejeune with the Marine Corps, we had to actually pretend that we were after the Viet Cong. So they had built all these mock-up villages, and the Marines would be the Viet Cong, and we'd come in and we'd have to set up different patrols and come in and basically assume the real relativity of Vietnam. So I went through three different stages of training for that. So I was prepared to go over there in Vietnam and do anything that they asked me to do. So, and there were war games and all that stuff. So I participated in all that.
What was life like before the war?
Well, before the war, basically it was a Cold War time. There wasn't anything really going on. There were, if you were in the service, you were deployed to different countries. Cuba being one of them, and Germany being another. And there were at that time there were three different CB bases in the United States. One in California at Port Hueneme, one in Davisville, Rhode Island, and one in Gulfport, Mississippi. And there was about I'd say 2,000 to 3,000 CBs in each one of those bases. So we would do things. One of my deployments was in Cuba, and I was down there for 13 months. And basically, Guantanamo Bay is a community I would say about 10,000 people. And if you were down there, it served as a big naval base. It was an Air Force base, Marine base. All that was down there, and there were barracks and all that. But also there was housing. So one of the things that I was in charge of was as the public works down in there. So I did all the plumbing and refrigeration and all that. And one of the jobs I had that was not so much fun was I had to pump out septic tanks and unclog sewer lines. So it was a bit of a challenge that way too. But as far as what was like before the war, nobody even were thinking of any war because there was anything that was going on. The French had occupied South Vietnam, and everything was going well there. And then we just heard about things like the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese would come in and they would try to displace the French. So before the war, we just sent advisors over there to advise the French and the South Vietnamese people how to defend themselves from the North Vietnamese that were coming in. So that was basically it. It's basically peacetime, but it was all Cold War. So
Once the war started, did your opinions of it change at all?
I really didn't have any opinions, but of the war itself, I thought it was interesting that we escalated that because being advisors at one point, then gradually sending in active troops, and then all of a sudden it turns into a full blown war in the late '60s, and it was a mess. It was really a terrible mess. Because I was young and a male, I was eager to want to participate in that and get into the military and help out. So
Do you have certain memories of events like the Tet Offensive?
I was in Cuba during the Tet Offensive. So by the time my tour of duty was finished in Cuba, the Tet Offensive was all over. And on my next deployment, I ran into a number of guys who were involved with the Tet Offensive, and it was pretty horrific coming from guys who were actively over there at the time. And one of our CB battalions was pretty well wiped out during the Tet Offensive.
Did you have any experience with native Vietnamese?
No, I never had any real contact except for one of the things we learned. They had Vietnamese translators come into the Camp Lejeune and the other Marine camps that I was at, and they would tell us what the phrases were that were used over in Vietnam that you could use to talk to the Vietnamese. So I never had, except for that particular case where you meet these translators and learn the language a little bit, I never had any real experience with the Vietnamese people itself until much later.
Moving back home, did you have any experiences with anti-war protests?
Absolutely. It was not fun back in those days being in the military because there were so many anti-war protests that you felt like an outsider. You felt almost like a criminal. In fact, when I used to fly home, on leave, and back in those days, you had 30 days leave a year as a military person, and you come home for a week or 2 weeks at a time, and there were always, like I would land at the Philadelphia airport, and there'd be protests there. So, and I remember distinctly, um, I got off the plane, got into the terminal, and they pointed at me, yelled, "There's one of those guys," you know. And so, so I quickly got out of the airport right away. So it was not fun being in the military. It really wasn't. You didn't feel like you were special. You felt like you were a real outsider. You really did. I know all the guys that I knew felt the same way. So it wasn't just me. So.
Um, what was life like after the war?
Well, after the war, let's see. Well, I got out of the Seabees in 1969, so the war went on for till 1975, and so for me, life was just uh, learning to transition from the military. Captured the enemy headquarters, and I did that accidentally because I took a group out at night, and we were doing a night raid, and I got lost, and so I came down and I decided to follow this one road, and we actually stumbled right onto the enemy headquarters, so I was able. But anyway, the story is that because I was so good at that, they said, "Well, we want you to go to Vietnam before your tour is up," and so Nancy wasn't very happy because I thought I was just getting out because I was in instructor training course then. And but it wasn't looking good because they were saying that now I got married, now I got to go to Vietnam. So you can imagine what goes on in a young couple's mind, you know. So, but one of the best things that Richard Nixon ever did as the president was he decommissioned my battalion.
Oh.
So he decommissioned it, and then when you get decommissioned, you automatically get it out. So I never had to go to Vietnam, and I got out of the Navy, and then I was able to get back into school, get a job, and then work my way through school. So I did just that. So by the time I finished my college education, it was right there at the end of the war. So I graduated from Villanova in 1975 with a mechanical engineering degree, and at the same time, that's when the Vietnam War came to an end. So for me, after all that, I just learned to, use my degree and then just become a regular citizen and regular worker and an engineer. So it was all uphill.
What is your opinion of the media's depiction of the war?
I thought it was. I thought first of all, I thought it was terrible because we already thought we were bad guys, and then every time they would have a program on about what was going on in Vietnam, what did they do? It was a body bag count. I mean, the only way you could tell you were winning or losing, or they measured winning or losing, was how many bodies they got, VC bodies, and then how many bodies of American soldiers were killed. So it was just body counts, every day body counts. So I think the media picked up on that and made it a real big deal. And the media never upplayed the military over there. It was always, the military's got to get out of there. They're never going to win that war, and there's no reason we should be there. And it's getting worse and worse and worse instead of better and better. So the media didn't help, not one bit. So, and it just made you feel worse as a guy. If you were a soldier or a sailor or whatever, you just felt bad. You felt like you were not doing what the country wanted you to do. And the whole reason I went into the service was because I thought, we were brainwashed a little bit in thinking that when we were in military training, and it was always, that's communism, and we had to stop communism. So these VC guys, these North Vietnamese, they were communists, and they were coming in to try to take over the country in South Vietnam, and they were in essence, but they weren't necessarily hardline communists. They had some different ideas. But we, as soldiers, we were just trained that we had to get in there. We had to get rid of the VC, the North Vietnamese, because they were communists, and we had to protect the South Vietnamese people. So we thought we had a good cause. We really did. And it turned out, nobody really wanted that good cause. They wanted it out of there. So.
Has your opinion of the war remained constant?
Yeah, I would say. We didn't win the war, that's for sure. And I think, I don't think it was necessary for us to even be in there. I really did. If now, all these years later, uh, despite being gung ho for going into the military, I don't really think Vietnam served anybody's good. We got out of there and let the Vietnamese people take care of themselves. Um, so and Vietnam today is Vietnam, and it's a great city to go visit. We get a lot of goods in here, and it's become quite an industrialized country. So it took care of itself. We didn't need to be in there with all these Americans dying and all these South Vietnamese dying. And somehow we should, we learned the lesson. I thought we did, but yeah, it was. Yeah, I didn't think the Vietnam War was necessary, even though I was over there and in the middle of it all, as far as the military goes.
All right. One last question. Did you know anyone else from home that was in the war?
Most of the guys that I knew that were in the war themselves were on board aircraft carriers and ships. I did have one close. He wasn't a friend, but he was an acquaintance that I knew, and we grew up kind of together. And he was a Green Beret, and he had some stories to tell. He was in Vietnam, and he worked with. I don't know if you ever heard of the Montagnards. They were the mountain people of Vietnam, and he would go in there and he would organize the Montagnards, and they would go around and they'd sneak up on the VC and try to wipe out them. But he lived the war itself. In fact, he was wounded a number of times. In fact, he still has shrapnel in his head, and but and he is a super talented artist. I mean, some of the art he used to do before he was in the service is fantastic, and he still does some of that now, but not to the degree that he could. He never exploited himself with regard to being an artist. He does taxidermy now, but I did talk to John. His name was John too, and we did talk because his wife is Nancy's best friend, and so and so we got together after he got out of the war and I got out of the war. We got together as couples, and we both had our children pretty close together. So it was fun. But John was what they found out recently was that he had that post-war stress syndrome, and nobody really. John was always weird after the war. He was strange. He's a strange guy. Wanted to keep to himself. Didn't want to do anything, and he was hard to get along with. I mean, he would tell his stories, and you see some of the pictures he had where one of his Montagnard friends had a necklace made of ears. So yeah, it was pretty gross. And because one of the things they did to count so they could show how good they were was when they killed an enemy, they would chop off an ear off their heads and then put it on their chain. So a guy with a whole lot of ears did a good job. And some of our own Green Beret guys did the same thing. So they got kind of sick. But John was a real soldier, a real Vietnam veteran, and he could just fill you with all sorts of stories that would make your head spin. But finally, after all these years, he went because he kept having these real big headaches. He went to the doctor, but he was also not addicted. He was always he had this post-traumatic stress syndrome that soldiers get coming back from Iraq or over in Afghanistan. So because of that, he was able to get full military benefits. So he got his health benefits back and all that. So they gradually put him under a medicine that treats that, and and he was able to make out, financially from that. So he's on the upswing now. So, but it took a long time. Took, he got out when he was about, I guess, in his mid-20s, and tried to live his life just like I did. But he had some issues for sure, and I don't blame him for the issues that he had. They were real issues, and it's a shame they didn't find out that he had this syndrome until 30 years later.
Well, compared to the Johnson and Nixon administrations.
Uh, well, it's funny now. I always thought at the time that uh, you know after Kennedy was shot, Johnson took over as president, um, and the Vietnam War just escalated like crazy. And I thought that at the time I thought Lyndon Johnson was doing the right thing, but then again, um, I think he realized that he was never going to win that war, and if you were in the military at that time, you kind of felt frustrated because now your own president says you're not going to win it, and people were over there fighting and dying. So it became, and then of course Nixon took over, um, and he of course was responsible for ending the Vietnam War. And so, as much as I really didn't care for President Nixon, he did a great thing for me and get me out of the military, and he also eventually ended the war. So I guess my original opinion of Johnson was good, and then went kind of sour, and my original opinion of Nixon was sour, and then turned out to be good, at least for me. So, but in your 20s, you really don't have too much of a valid opinion. It's what you read, what you hear, and I never was that smart enough politically to understand why I felt a certain way. It was all emotion at that point.
All right.
Here we go. Okay.
Okay, so just a little description of the CBs itself. Basically, by the emblem I showed you, it's a bee that's flying, and the bee itself has tools in four of its hands, and in its front two hands has a machine gun. So that's what the emblem basically is. But CB means construction battalions, and then they took the actual word CB and made it SEABEES, hence the fighting Seabees. So, but the motto, there's two mottos for the Seabees. First one is can do, and that means whatever is in front of us, we'll take care of it, whatever we have to do. And then, but the real motto is at the bottom of all of our descriptions. It's two words in Latin, meaning saying construimus batuimus, which means we build, we fight. So that's the whole idea of the Seabees itself. You either go there and do your job, or you go there and fight and do your job. So that's a little history.
Nice.